Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines.
New signs the job market is slowing. Welcome to the Tuesday edition as ADP fills the data void with lower payrolls from October. We'll be talking about this coming up throughout the hour. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Tyler Kendall in Washington. She's in for Kaylee Lines here on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Tyler, the reason, of course, why we have a vacuum of data is the government is still closed, although that may be changing in the next 24 hours.
Right. It feels like we are inching closer to the government reopening. It's now our understanding that the House is going to hold this vote on the package at 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. House Speaker Mike Johnson, though, still has some work cut out for him. He can only afford to lose 2 Republican votes, and that's if they all make it to town amid the shutdown delays related to our air system.
Trains, planes, and automobiles for House lawmakers, at least those who are not here, and they'll have about 24 hours to get back to town for what looks like will be a vote to reopen the government tomorrow evening. Then the president would sign that bill. How long it will take for us to start getting economic data remains a question, though, Tyler.
Right, as well as how long is it going to take for those recipients that get food benefits from SNAP? When are they going to see their accounts replenished, as well as when are we going to see our air travel system back up and running? Now, of course, you mentioned at the top there the ADP numbers came out. That, of course, is one of the metrics that investors have been watching amid this lack of data, and it's something that the markets responded to earlier today. So for a check on the Tuesday trade, we go now to Alexis Christoforous in World Headquarters in New York for a look. Hey, Alexis.
Thanks so much, Tyler and Joe. Yeah, stocks are trying to bounce off their session lows as optimism that this U.S. shutdown is coming to an end. That's helping to offset a technology sell-off today led by NVIDIA. We've got the Dow at its best level of the session, up 479 points. The S&P 500 now in the green by 10. And the NASDAQ off its worst level of the day, now down about 80 points, still pressured by declines in key artificial intelligence stocks following big gains in the previous session. Japanese tech giant SoftBank says it sold its stake in NVIDIA last month for $5.8 billion. The sale comes as SoftBank now focuses its attention on OpenAI. That's the startup behind ChatGPT, but SoftBank's still involved with NVIDIA through other AI ventures that use the chipmaker's technology, such as that Stargate project. Shares of NVIDIA down 2.7%, SoftBank rallying 2%. And CoreWeave, the provider of cloud computing services, said revenue more than doubled last quarter, boosted by that AI boom, while its net loss narrowed. But CoreWeave is flagging a delay by a data center developer, and that's pushing shares down today. And finally, Rocket Lab shares rocketing 3.3%. The space transportation company reporting revenue that beat Wall Street's estimates. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Alexis, thank you so much. And thank you for being with us here on the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to speak with Republican Congressman Byron of Florida. He, like many, are on their way back to Washington for an anticipated vote tomorrow to reopen the government. And we'll have some things to ask Congressman Donalds when he joins us later this hour. Jared Bernstein is going to be talking with us as well, Tyler. This idea that not only do we have a lack of data, but also data that may not reflect the way Americans are feeling. This is something that Donald Trump talked about a lot last evening in his interview on Fox News. Not buying the idea. He said he doesn't believe the polls, and he thinks it's a Democratic con job that people are not feeling the benefits of this economy.
Right, and one of those polls was one of ours conducted by the Harris poll for Bloomberg News, which found that a majority of Americans aren't happy with the state of the economy right now. But what's important from that survey is that that is up from 41% back in February when President Trump originally took office. Affordability, of course, Joe, is going to be top of mind as we head into the midterms.
It was 1 week ago tonight when affordability featured prominently in elections, of course, in New York, New Jersey, Virginia. California might have been a slightly different matter, but that was a wake-up call for some Republicans, and that's why many Democrats were surprised to see the moderates flip in the Senate a couple nights ago.
Right, exactly, because the government shutdown has really been overshadowing those national headlines as it continues to drag on, and Americans feel the impacts. So for the latest on where we stand, on how close we are to reopening the government, we bring in Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, a senior editor here in our Washington bureau, for a look on where this is all heading. So, Wendy, just give us an update. Are we looking at the government potentially reopening by tomorrow evening?
It could be, because remember but we're really close. I was just thinking whether it was Wednesday night or Thursday morning. President Trump has to sign the bill once it passes the House. So whether he chooses to sign it on Wednesday night or do it Thursday in front of cameras to make a big deal about it, which I suspect would be his preference, then it could be Thursday. But the country is certainly on its way to reopening at this point. It'll be this week.
Now, what do we think about the optics here? Does President Trump have a signing ceremony at a moment like this after the longest shutdown in history? Does he try to take credit for what happened here, or do we just do this quickly and get on with our business?
I don't know. I think he certainly could spin it, and this is what the liberal Democrats are so angry about, is that he could spin it as the Democrats caved in. It's all nonsense. As you talked about, he's mentioned a Democratic con job about how voters are feeling about the economy. Yeah. I would page Joe Biden to find, on whether it's really a con job or not. When Americans say they're unhappy, they're often unhappy. But he could spin it as a total victory for himself. I also think that Democrats, were able to do this because they had won, as you mentioned last Tuesday. There was a Democratic sweep in generally liberal places, but Virginia is certainly purple. And it had become clear that they had won in terms of who was getting blamed for the shutdown. It is, at least I think by about 10 points, voters are blaming Republicans for the shutdown because they control the White House and both chambers of Congress. But so they've gotten that, and then the American public could turn on them very quickly if Thanksgiving travel is messed up, if people aren't getting their SNAP benefits, if this just keeps getting worse and worse and people are going without a third paycheck. I think the collective electorate might turn on the Democrats. So they can also spin this as the strategic thing to do to get the country back and up and running. Well,
back up and running until at least January 30th. I'm curious if we can talk just a little bit more about what's actually in this package that we're voting on. One, are we going to be set up for another fight come the end of January? And two, I'm wondering how the White House is feeling about an important provision that Democrats got, which reverses those mass federal firings that we saw starting on October 1st and puts a block on them through at least January 30th. It's perhaps a simple stopgap measure, but there's also a lot of other things included that we should keep in mind.
Absolutely. There are all those things you mentioned, and you're right, blocking the mass firings was something Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, really wanted in there and got that. And so that will be good for federal workers, but you're absolutely right, Tyler. We are back here again, Groundhog Day, in mid-January when everybody gets back from the holidays, and here we are facing that again. There's also other little weird things in there, like some senators can now, there's a provision that allows senators to sue over their phone records being seized in one of these investigations, which shouldn't really even be in a spending bill, but this is what they call the Christmas tree ornaments. So there's a lot of little hidden gems throughout this bill.
Hidden gems with Wendy Benjaminson. Thank you, Wendy. Bloomberg senior editor in Washington, which helps us set up our conversation with Jared Bernstein. Having listened to the president last evening, he sat down with Laura Ingraham on Fox News, who actually challenged the president on the idea that it is the greatest economy in history, as he puts it. More importantly, though, when it comes to costs, this is something that we've heard the president check reporters' questions on frequently, suggesting that it's a Democrat hoax that costs are going up, that people are not feeling the benefits of the broader Trump economic agenda, and more specifically, the big, beautiful bill. Listen to what he said last evening.
Is this a voter perception issue of the economy, or is there more that needs to be done by Republicans on Capitol Hill, or done in terms of policy? More than anything else, it's a con job by the Democrats. They're saying, they just have to say, they put out something, say today costs are up. They feed it to the anchors of ABC, CBS, and NBC, and a lot of other, and CNN, and et cetera. Are you ready? Costs are way down. Gasoline is going to be hitting $2 pretty soon.
Well, of course, we've been keeping a very close eye on gas prices, and the national average remains quite a bit higher than $2. It's closer to $3, in fact. And I'm still waiting to get the memo on the talking points here, because this is a conversation we used to have with officials in the Biden administration frequently. You remember Jared Bernstein standing on the North Lawn talking with us about this, and and why Americans were not always feeling the lower prices the data were showing. And we thought, well, Wendy suggested we page the Biden administration. Well, here we go right now. Jared Bernstein, of course, was chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors for 4 years under Joe Biden. He's now senior fellow for economic policy at the Center for American Progress. Jared, it's great to have you back. And I wonder what you thought of that conversation, listening last evening to the president speak about a very different world than what data are showing or anecdotal evidence are showing. And you start to get this push and pull here where it's very difficult to tell people how they feel. What did you make of the rhetoric last evening?
Well, as your setup for our conversation underscored, I think the president is making just a foundational, fundamental error here by trying to tell people they're better off than they think, really than they know they are. Now, he mentioned the gas price. It's not $2 a gallon. It's $3.08 a gallon this morning, and that's exactly the same price it was a year ago. It's actually $3.07, and so not much there. Now, I think the thing that's going on here is that President Trump often is able to persuade his followers of his reality, even if that reality isn't backed up by the facts. But I feel very firmly that that particular superpower of this president, who really is an effective communicator to his followers, simply doesn't work when it comes to affordability. We certainly saw that result at the polls with the affordability election a week ago today. And I'm sure that the kinds of comments he was making last night are going to do him more harm than good when it comes to that very issue.
Well, affordability isn't about any one item, one issue, and President Trump was asked about one potential proposal last night in this interview when it comes to a 50-year mortgage. We want to play you a little bit more sound because Fox News pressed him on it as he's getting some pushback from some of those in his own base.
It's not even a big deal. I mean, you know, you go from 40 to 50 years, and what it means is 50, you pay something less from 30, that some people had a 40 and then now they have a 50. All it means is you pay less per month. You pay it over a longer period of time.
The idea is light on details, but Jared, is this the direction of travel we're headed in when it comes to attempts to lower monthly payments? I'm wondering how you would jumpstart the housing market and the impacts that we could see from the economy if a proposal like this went into place.
Let me give you some interesting information on that, unpacking that important question. First of all, on this 50-year mortgage idea, it's being lambasted pretty broadly. And I did a calculation this morning. I revved up the old spreadsheet just to see what happened. If you look over the course of a 30-year versus a 50-year mortgage, I think you have to kick up the mortgage rate a little bit because lenders will ask for a little bit more for locking up 50-year loans. You're literally paying over $300,000 more in interest over the life of the loan. So yes, you might pay a little bit less on a monthly basis, but over the life of the loan, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars more on interest. But there's a broader point here. I think that the Republican Party in general and President Trump specifically have really lost any policy chops when it comes to affordability policy. It's actually fairly gnarly stuff. You really have to roll up your sleeves and get into the analysis. You can't have Director Pulte of the FHFA come in and say, here's a great idea, and then 10 minutes later, as I believe you've reported, the president goes out and says, new idea. Same thing with his stimmies, these $2,000 stimulus checks to offset the effects of the tariffs, which, by the way, he claims don't have price effects. Same thing with their health savings account, which is really just a tax shelter for wealthy people, not a health insurance program. So they really have a problem in that their muscle memory for affordability policies is quite unutilized. And I think there the Democrats have an advantage. And again, I think you saw that in the election.
You ever meet anyone or know anyone who had a 40-year mortgage, Jared? I heard the president saying that some people are paying 40. That would be would that be a qualified mortgage, or are those available commercially?
They were for a time, and then they weren't. So you might find a few people who have them, but by far the most common mortgage is, of course, the 30-year FRM, the fixed-rate mortgage. And by the way, it would take legislation to implement a 50-year mortgage. I don't think this is going anywhere. I think this is some stray voltage, the idea of the day. But my broader point is I do think they're flailing here, and I think they'll continue to do so. By the way, I didn't answer the very good question of, well, what the heck would you do if you wanted to deal with the housing market? And here I'm going to give you a little bit of a lead, which is that very shortly, I think next week, the Center for American Progress, where I'm a policy fellow, I might even be a distinguished policy fellow, that just means you're old, where I'm a policy fellow, will be releasing a housing a document on housing policy, wherein we have numerous ideas that have been, again, we rolled up our sleeves and got into the weeds, but we have ideas that should significantly reduce the cost of both home ownership and rentals. So that's a little bit of a tease for something coming out next week.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we want to ask you about another one of President Trump's proposed policies, including this potential $2,000 rebate check tied to tariff revenues. We know that rebate stimulus checks would have to be approved by Congress. I'm wondering how feasible you see this being and what that impact would be on the broader economy if it even gets approved.
I think it would be a heavy lift for Congress. Even Republicans, when they see the price tag, I think would balk. There were numerous analyses out yesterday showing that almost any way you cut it, this idea would absorb well over what the nation is collecting in tariff revenues right now, which is something in the $200 to $300 billion a year amount in terms of the revenue collections from the customs. Remember, contrary to a lot of what the president says, the folks who pay the tariffs are the importers, the American companies that are importing these these goods, and that's why it shows up in our national accounts. And the stimulus checks to allegedly offset the costs from these tariffs, and there are real costs there. They are juicing inflation, particularly of imported goods, would swamp the amount of revenue, even though that's substantial revenue. This is a very expensive promise. So I doubt it would occur. I also think you have to be concerned about the Federal Reserve. I mean, they're kind of on a knife's edge there in terms of balancing a weakening job market and higher prices. They're looking at a nascent stagflationary environment. I think you'd be fighting the Fed big time if you tried to implement this policy.
Just about a minute left here, Jared. We started by talking about this ADP report, and as we see continued cooling in the job market without the benefit of monthly BLS data, I just wonder where your head is on this. The Fed is kind of flying blind until the government can start churning out monthly job reports again, but this was a trajectory already in place. Where's the job market going to be a couple of months from now, and are you worried about this continued contraction?
I definitely am concerned about it, and I wrote about it this morning on my Substack about precisely this question. The title of my piece was, "Are Layoffs Accelerating?" And I concluded, based on a lot of private sector data, ADP, but one bit of public sector data, which is unemployment insurance claims, they're still coming in, that it does look like layoffs are accelerating, but the trend is quite mild. So maybe flashing yellow, definitely not flashing red, and that's a maybe on the yellow. I do think the unemployment rate is probably ticking up, and I would guess by the end of the year it's a couple of, which is next month actually, it's a couple of tenths higher than it is now.
All right, Jared Bernstein, chair of the White House Economic Council of Advisors under President Joe Biden and senior fellow for economic policy at the Center for American Progress. Thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg. Our political panel is on the way next. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
Make sure to subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast. You know the drill. Get to Apple, Spotify.
1:21 on Wall Street. I'm Alexis Christoforous. White House National Economic Director Kevin Hassett said the record-long government shutdown means that some of the economic data that was supposed to be collected in October may never be recorded, making it difficult to get a comprehensive look at the health of the U.S. economy. Today, we saw another sign of possible weakness in the job market. Payroll firm ADP estimates the private sector lost 11,250 jobs per week in October. On Wall Street, stocks are mixed with the Dow Industrials flying high, up 538 points. The S&P 500 in the green by 18. The NASDAQ well off its session lows, now down just 53 points. Shares of Paramount Skydance up about 11% after the company raised its target for job cuts and cost-saving measures. Paramount now plans to lay off another 1,600 workers and aims to save at least $3 billion in costs. Shares of Beyond Meat trading down about 7% after the plant-based meat company reported third-quarter results that missed the mark and provided a weak forecast for the fourth quarter. And shares of Sony rallying 4.5%, the company raising its profit outlook and getting a boost from recent hit titles, including the anime movie Demon Slayer. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Alexis, thanks so much. As Alexis mentioned, I'm Tyler Kendall here alongside Joe Mathieu in Washington, where we are now counting down the hours to 4 p.m. Eastern tomorrow when the House is set to reconvene and vote on this package that could reopen the government. Now, Joe Mathieu, it's not a done deal yet, but it seems like it's headed in the right direction, as we just heard from President Trump moments ago, speaking on ESPN, saying that he thinks the House is going to vote in favor of it.
Well, and that does seem to be the case, although they might have a little bit of whipping to do. There are a few constituencies who might not love this, but Speaker Johnson did say in the last 24 hours that he thinks he's got the votes. There is a path in the House, then it would head for the president's desk. The question is the unwinding of obviously trouble at the airports, how to fulfill SNAP benefits, how to get people paid after getting them off the payrolls, furloughed workers back in the office. And it could be weeks, not days, before all of that is done.
Right. And we have to keep in mind, once the House passes it, it then has to go to President Trump's desk, of course, for him to sign it. But we know that the White House is trying to get this done as quickly as possible, as it's really become a political issue. But, Joe, of course, we have our eyes set then on the next deadline, maybe the end of the year, for expiring Affordable Care Act premium tax subsidies. Right. And then January 30th, when the stopgap measure ends.
And the government could potentially close all over again. I'm deeply curious about how SNAP benefits are fulfilled, because we should note yesterday, even as the gears started to turn on reopening the government, the administration went back to the Supreme Court for a second time to ask for cover on not fulfilling SNAP benefits for some 42 million Americans, currently paying about half of those benefits, I think at 60%, urging justices to intervene in a court battle over this, raising a lot of questions about the politics behind this decision. And we're going to get into this with our panel now. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Rick is partner at Stonecourt Capital, our Republican strategist. Jeanne is Democracy Visiting Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, our Democratic analyst. What's going on here, Rick? Why would the administration want to be on the record as to pushing back on feeding people who don't have food?
Yeah, I think you have to sort of take a step back and understand what the administration's goal is. They have to use the device, which is, hey, we haven't chosen to fund those SNAP benefits, so we shouldn't be forced to by a federal judge. And at the core of it is the administration is in charge of the administration of the budget, not the courts. And so we can't be told what to do by a federal court. We have the authority to do what we want to do with the federal budget in consultation and direction by the Congress. And so this is all about presidential power, executive authority. It's got really nothing to do with the SNAP benefits, other than the fact that they are the vehicle by which this court case is getting to the Supreme Court. So what he's hopeful the president's hopeful is that the court says, no, you're right. The executive branch is the only branch that can determine what to pay. The downside is politically, it's a horrible thing to fight. I'm like, oh, yeah, we're going to deny you SNAP benefits so that we can make a point about executive authority.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the administration is also citing the fact that one of the key agencies that this package funds is the USDA. So theoretically, funding for food benefits through the next fiscal year, September 30th, should be resolved soon enough once the government reopens. But Jeanne, much to Rick's point, at this point, is that political damage already done when we've seen food benefits really come to the forefront of this conversation around the government being closed for a record amount of time?
Yeah, the damage is done, but they're making it worse. I mean, they are digging a hole. Let's not forget, all of a sudden, the Trump administration seems terribly concerned about what the courts are saying. But we all remember back a few months when they were taking people off the streets and shipping them to gulags in South America. They didn't seem terribly concerned about what the judges were saying then. So they seem to find religion when it pertains to doing something that they don't want to do. And in this case, what they don't want to do is pay for SNAP benefits. And the reality is today is Veterans Day. The president was just at Arlington Cemetery waxing poetical about veterans. And 1 million of those 42 million people that are being denied SNAP benefits are veterans. 16 million are children. 8 million are elderly Americans. This is what they are fighting against doing. And to their credit, they did tell the court this may be a moot point if we get the shutdown over with. But the reality is politically, this bodes very badly for the administration. And Trump seems way off his game to me politically in the last few weeks, because anytime you're having a conversation about affordability, to your conversation with Jared Bernstein, it is bad for the Trump administration and it is bad for Republicans.
You know, Rick, when I think about all the stuff that we've witnessed here over the past couple of weeks, the snarling of airports, federal workers not getting paid, SNAP benefits not being fulfilled or funded here. We've talked a couple of times to lawmakers since this shutdown and just before it about the Eliminate Shutdowns Act. There was another one called the Prevent Shutdowns Act, and you've heard of these before. Ron Johnson came on to explain his position on this and why he put his name on the bill quite recently. It would be, and any lapse in funding would trigger essentially a short-term continuing resolution. So at least the lights would stay on, people would keep getting paid, people wouldn't be starving, and then lawmakers could hash out a longer-term budget deal. Have we made the case for a law like that here with what we've seen from airport traffic control towers down to soup kitchens in the past couple of weeks?
Yeah, there's no question that government shutdowns hurt, right? And the longer they go, the more they hurt. And that case has been made. But let's not forget, it's Congress's job to pass these budget bills, right? This is not a question of like, gee, we need to have something to automatically go into effect when we don't do our job. Who else gets that? I mean, like, you don't show up, automatically the show's going to be canceled today because Joe didn't show up. No, the show must go on. And they need to get that message that they can't pass laws that keep them from having to do their job. I mean, like, somebody should pay a political price for not having gotten this done in Congress. And I'll leave it to the parties to make the case. But the American public will determine who is at fault here, and they are always right because they're the only ones who get to cast a vote.
Well, Jeanne, Joe just outlined one deadline that we're, of course, watching, January 30th. But what about the deadline of the end of the year when the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies expire? Realistically, is there going to be a deal by then to extend this coverage?
I am not banking on it, Tyler. When it comes to Congress, I have a hard time these days saying, oh, yeah, I think we will get there. You know, I think it's possible that we get some kind of deal out of the Senate, maybe, but I don't know where that lands in the House. And I just can't see that working its way through the House. That said, it would be to the benefit, obviously, of Americans, but also of Republicans in the Senate and the House who are facing election in 26 to get something done. So maybe that spurs them forward. But at this point, I think we are so closely divided in both the House and the Senate. I think it's going to be very difficult to do. And I would just say on a shutdown bill, the problem with having something like that passed is that you look at this and parties benefit from shutdowns. They do not feel pain. The Democrats, if things continue the way they are, will have benefited from messaging the right way on this shutdown, just like Republicans did in 95 and 96. That's why even if they pass a law, they're probably not going to tie their own hands enough to make sure we're not right back here again. And maybe, Tyler, to your point, even as soon as January 30th, or, although, gosh, I hope not.
We talked to a lot of angry Democrats yesterday, Jeanne, who were not happy with the 8 senators who decided to cross the aisle and vote with Republicans. And I'm wondering what you think happens, what's waiting for those Democrats in the House who are reportedly set to vote yes as well. Cuellar of Texas, Golden of Maine, Gluesenkamp-Perez of Washington, Gonzalez of Texas. Will they all be on an island after this?
They may be on an island, but Golden's not running again. The others are in really moderate, middle-of-the-road districts, and so I don't think their voters will be surprised. But yeah, Democrats are raging angry. They have a right to be angry, but the reality is this was never going to end any other way. But I think the one who really pays the price in the long term here is going to be Chuck Schumer. They are not happy with his ability to message a win.
Rick, I mean this seriously. The House is coming back after more than 50 days out of session. What have lawmakers been doing? Has this been time well spent with constituents? Well, we've seen polling showing that Americans have been pretty uneasy about this government shutdown.
Well, considering the number of invites I've received in my emails and texts, they've been raising a lot of money. There have been a lot of fundraisers, that's for sure. So, yeah, they've made good use of that as far as a political purpose. But I haven't noticed a whole lot of town halls going on during this period of time. Have you? I mean, like they've been laying low, and I don't blame them. But I would say, look, the happiest guy in the United States Senate for these Democrats to have walked across the aisle and unfrozen the accounts of the government is Chuck Schumer. He was desperate for a deal. He put on a good show, but he is the one guy who's sitting back going, God, thank God they walked the aisle and got rid of this, because it has really been hurting me and I don't know how to handle it.
You know, Rick's not the first one to suggest it, Jeanne. Did these 8 senators save Chuck Schumer in the near term? And do you think he actually runs for re-election after all this?
I'm not sure he can. I'm sitting in New York. He is facing a really tough uphill battle if AOC runs. And yeah, I too have heard that this was sort of a secret or not so secret plot for him to get these 8 to walk the plank for him. I think that's possible. The outcome is just in keeping with the Chuck Schumer that we know, hence the real frustration against Democrats who want to move on beyond what they see as a geriatric Democratic leadership. And unfortunately, Chuck Schumer is the poster child for that now that Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are gone.
All right, our political panel today, both Bloomberg Politics contributors, Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino. Thank you so much, as always. And Joe, we have a lot to keep our eye on, not just tomorrow, of course, as this 4 p.m. Eastern vote we're expecting gets underway, but then what's going to happen as we head into the holidays and these other deadlines that are looming.
That's for sure. We're going to talk to a lawmaker who's going to be called to vote in the next 24 hours. It looks like Byron Donalds, the Republican from Florida, will be with us next as we consider next steps here. To Tyler's point, they could be voting roughly 24 hours from now. The Rules Committee is going to get the ball rolling tonight as lawmakers trickle back into town. I wouldn't want to be a representative waiting at the airport today, though.
No, and definitely House Speaker Mike Johnson needs all of them to be back here in order to get this vote underway. Stick with us. We'll have more next.
$140 on Wall Street. I'm Alexis Christoforous, and stocks remain mixed as investors are hopeful that an end to the longest government shutdown in U.S. history is near. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rallying 520 points, or more than 1%. The S&P 500 is up 15, and the Nasdaq in the red by about 70 points. Bond market closed today for Veterans Day. Another sign of weakness in the labor market from private payroll provider ADP, which found U.S. companies lost an average of 11,250 jobs per week in October. Nearly 1.1 million job cuts have been announced so far this year. That's according to outplacement firm Challenger Gray and Christmas. It's the most since 2020. In stock news, the AI cloud computing company CoreWeave coming under pressure. Revenue more than doubled last quarter while its net loss narrowed, but CoreWeave flagged a delay by a data center developer, and that stock is now down by double digits. The quantum computing company Rigetti Computing logging a smaller than expected adjusted per share loss. However, quarterly revenue did disappoint at Rigetti. And Gemini Space Station, that's the crypto exchange founded by the Winklevoss twins, that reported a steeper loss than analysts anticipated in its first earnings release since going public. Shares of Gemini Space now down more than 15%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Alexis, thank you. She'll have more on the markets coming up at the top of the hour, 2 p.m. Eastern, as Bloomberg Business Week Daily gets off the ground. And we're all keeping our eyes on Capitol Hill today for good reason. The Senate passed the legislation last evening that would reopen the government. Once the House does the same, the president pulls out the Sharpie, and we're back in business, of course, knowing that it could take some time for airlines to get back together, for airports and air traffic control towers to be fully staffed, SNAP benefits to be funded, and, of course, the hundreds of thousands of furloughed federal workers to get back to work and get a paycheck in the bank account. So, Tyler, what we have here is a Rules Committee hearing. It's going to be an important one that's set to start a few hours from now. And they'll start hashing out the rules that will bring the bill to the floor. And by 4 p.m., we're told, don't necessarily bet on that, but around 4 p.m. we'll have a vote in the House that could actually end this shutdown.
Right. If we've learned anything, things could change quickly
yes,
in the House of Representatives. But this is what we're tracking as of now. House Speaker Mike Johnson can only afford to lose 2 Republican votes, but it appears that his hand has been bolstered by the fact that President Trump has thrown his weight behind this deal, saying that he wants to sign it into law. Now, we're going to talk to one of the members who is going to cast his vote when this comes up tomorrow, and that's Congressman Byron. He's a Republican representing Florida's 19th district. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I think I probably know the answer, but just to get you on the record and to confirm, how are you going to vote when this package comes up tomorrow?
I'm voting yes tomorrow. It's time for the government to be reopened and end this shutdown created by Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. To be blunt, we're still not even sure what they shut the government down for in the first place, but we're excited to get back to work and get this to the president's desk as quickly as possible.
Congressman, I want to ask you about one of the provisions that we're seeing included, which is a rollback, a reversal of the mass federal firings that started on October 1st, also puts a block on any future firings until January 30th. Do you have any concern with this policy, since we know it's something that this White House had been advocating for?
No, we don't. There's been a lot of work in this regard the entire year. That's number one. Number two, everybody knows at this point that one of the ways we're going to be able to get our spending under control, which is a major concern for the bond markets and our credit rating agencies, is we're going to have to streamline the federal government across the board. Part of that has been giving workers an opportunity to leave the federal workforce. Some of them have been provided bonuses on their way out the door. And so I think this is going to continue. But, you know, we have a temporary measure that we have to get through here, and we're going to do that and get the government reopened.
Congressman, it's good to see you. And you said something in your first answer that was important. What was this all for? Because it seems to me that this could have been something that took place weeks ago, knowing that Democrats were offered an up or down vote on extending Obamacare subsidies. Many told us here on the air that that was simply not good enough. And I know a lot of them still feel that way, who are going to vote no, because they wanted an actual deal on paper. John Thune has promised that vote now. Should Speaker Johnson do the same?
No, I think that's something that John Thune and the Senate has to go through. Let's talk real quickly about these Obamacare subsidies that were part of one of the things that Democrats were talking about. Let's first be clear. Democrats were arguing for like 5 different things over the last 40 days, and that's how you know that their negotiations weren't serious. This was much more about politics from the Democratic left and politics from Chuck Schumer trying to save his job as Senate Minority Leader. But to the specific issue about Obamacare subsidies, what the Democrats have been telling the American people consistently is that they need more subsidies to cover up the true cost of health care. And these subsidies are on top of the existing structure of subsidies built into the law of the Affordable Care Act. So in short, more subsidies is not going to fix Obamacare. What it's going to do is mask the true cost and the true damage to families everywhere. I've talked to people where their premiums for a bronze plan are now $2,000 a month. That's rent. That's a mortgage in some parts of the country. The deductible's $12,000 to $14,000 a year. So if you're making $125,000 a year as a family, you don't have $2,000 a month in disposable income to pay premiums, let alone the $14,000 to pay the deductible before you even start accessing the health insurance policy. This is what's wrong with Obamacare. The Democrats want to cover it up using subsidies as opposed to fixing the problem that they created 15 years ago.
So then what is the plan, Congressman? Are we talking about replacing? President Trump has said that he'd be willing to negotiate when it comes to this very issue. So what's feasible? What's going to get through your chamber that would get your vote?
I think what's feasible are some of the reforms that we tried to get through back in 2017. I will tell you, by the way, Democrats refused to lift a finger and work with us to avoid the calamity that we see today. But that's centered around healthcare policies that are patient-centered. It's about healthcare policies that do not have overburdensome requirements on all the things that are covered that really create a bureaucratic bloat. It makes the premiums more expensive. It's about making sure there's more catastrophic insurance policies in the marketplace. Maybe you have young workers, they don't need a full gold-plated healthcare policy. What they need is catastrophic healthcare coverage and ability to go get regular visits and checkups. That's a key part of this. There's a study being done. It was one, I think Senator Ron Johnson released these findings actually, and it's demonstrated that employer-provided coverage in most of the country has just marginally risen over inflation. But when you look at health insurance policies in the Obamacare exchanges, they are up 200, 300, 400, in some respects, 500% over inflation. That's crazy. We've created a two-tier system in healthcare. So I would tell the American people, this is not simply about subsidies for Obamacare. It is about providing real solutions that put patients first, so we have a healthcare system and a healthcare insurance marketplace that people can afford and be able to access healthcare readily in their communities.
Well, I love that we're having this conversation, Congressman, and I wonder your thoughts on what the president said to Laura Ingraham last evening, because he's been on Truth Social about this as well. Give the money directly to people and let them negotiate with health insurers is essentially what he said. The quote was, the insurance will be better, it'll cost less. They're going to feel like entrepreneurs, he said. They'll actually be able to go out and negotiate their own health insurance. Would that still require a pool of patients, though, Congressman, to create leverage? Or am I calling up United Healthcare and trying to get my own rates at the same time that you are?
Well, I think there's parts of what you're saying are true, some that'll have to be worked on. I think the premise of the president laying out is the correct one. Look at any industry in our economy, the ones where people have direct purchasing power to go to companies and buy the product they're looking for, those prices are actually increasing lower than the rate of inflation. But when you bring in these other issues, these other areas where the government is doing direct subsidies, that's where the prices are completely out of control. And so for me, the situation is clear. The situation is clear. You have to put people at the front of the line. They got to be able to make those purchasing decisions. If it's giving those dollars directly to the individual, that will work. Now, to your question around risk pools, this is essential in all insurance. We could look at setting up geographic risk pools as an idea, so that people in that community or in that state can actually be dealing with the insurance companies, but the insurance companies actually have a defined risk pool. This is one of the reasons why large companies have cheaper insurance than when people are just going into the marketplace by themselves, because they're using the risk profile of working for that company to set up the risk pool to what then the actuaries kind of decide how much is the cost to insure each person in that pool. There's ways to do this, but the Obamacare way has been a disaster. It is now proven, and the costs are out of control.
We're talking about next steps here, and I also want to talk about the next steps for fully funding the government, because the stopgap measure goes until January 30th. How are we going to avoid another shutdown? Are we going to be having this conversation again when we know that the Senate has been proposing some spending levels that are higher than many House Republicans want to see?
Well, again, we're going to get back to the negotiating table in short order. I know Speaker Johnson has told the members that we can expect some very long days when we get back to Capitol Hill, and that's fine. That's our job, and we're more than happy to do that. I think it's important for my Senate colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, to understand one very important thing. We are borrowing a lot of money. The bond market is looking at us to curtail spending, and this is the core position of House Republicans. We can still have a federal government that does its job, but we don't have to be so obscene in how we are spending other people's money. And I think that, if we come back to the situation again in January, I think whether it's healthcare or spending, it's important for myself and my colleagues to communicate clearly to the American people of what's truly at stake. Everybody wants to talk about the economy, affordability. These are major issues for the American people. The core of our affordability problems is massive government overspending. It diminishes the purchasing power of the American dollar. It does not help American families be able to make ends meet. In Washington, for once, we got to do the right thing. Let's cut our spending, get that down, and let's pass bills so we're not doing this brinksmanship, which, by the way, the Democrats are the ones who want to do it. People should know the Democrats, most of them are mad about this deal to reopen the government. They want the government to continue to be shut down. That's not an appropriate way to get the business done for the American people.
Well, we have talked to a number of Democratic lawmakers who were not happy with the 8 who crossed the aisle on this because there wasn't a deal there that they were hoping for. Certainly, Congressman. I want to mention to our viewers on Bloomberg TV, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, that the congressman does not have a new job. He's not working at Cantor. He's actually down in Miami right now at an important AI energy infrastructure conference. And I've got to ask you, because we typically get to this because of your committee assignments and your areas of interest, an important bipartisan bill came out of the Senate last evening, the Ag Committee, on a crypto market structure bill. And I'm wondering where this stands in the House. We've talked so much about the Clarity Act and whether there's going to be some reconciliation between these two pieces of legislation or a different path.
I think we're probably going to end up sitting down and coming to an agreement between the two chambers on this. The one thing that's very clear, I'm happy that my Senate colleagues are taking this seriously. AI, quantum computing, the future of energy for our country, these are critical components to our economic future. If we don't actually create the frameworks for this, we fall further behind to China, to Europe, and some of our rivals on the world stage. So this is actually important stuff that we can get done. I'm very happy that AI and quantum is not a partisan issue because it's really about the future of our economy. And so let's see what they have. We'll work together with them and try to get something done that's going to put the American people first and actually be in the best interests of our country.
Could you give us any timeline that we should be watching out for? Any chance that this is going to get done by the end of the year?
Listen, I don't put any timelines on Washington. You've been around long enough. You know, what you do is you go in there, you work hard. You try not to set artificial deadlines. I do believe that you have members of the Senate, members of the House, myself included, who want to see a regulatory framework in AI, and crypto, and quantum. It is important. We have to be able to get this job done because we have many other public policy issues that we have to address as well. One of them is energy. I'm a major proponent for small modular nuclear reactors to be commercially deployed throughout the United States. Every state needs to double their amount of power on their grid. The United States needs to do that. And this is something where my colleagues on Capitol Hill, this is common sense stuff that actually provides energy at a lower per kilowatt hour than any other generation source. We need to get in the game and get that done as well.
Well, you know, Congressman, few stories are more important to our audience. So let's talk about that. Let's have that conversation when you're back in town with our eyes, of course, on the AI space. Congressman Byron Donalds, I hope you get the flight back to D.C. all right. That's easier said than done. Representing Florida's 19th district, I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Tyler Kendall. We'll be back on the late edition of Balance of Power as the Rules Committee gets underway here in the House. Lawmakers are streaming back into town. We expect a vote to reopen the government tomorrow. We'll see you in a couple hours from now on Bloomberg.